When the officers stopped her car on the empty highway, it seemed like a routine check, but their sneering looks said it all before they even spoke. "You're not getting through here with that red rag." Minutes later, her belongings were scattered on the road. A blaring siren pierced the air, and a smug cop was trying to break into a briefcase he had no business touching. They didn't know who Claire Randall was, but soon they'd regret ever pulling her over. The Colorado sun glared down on the highway, its rays glinting off Claire Randall's black SUV as she cruised down the open road. Her bright red MAGA cap perched proudly on her head wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a statement. A proud Texan and unapologetic Republican, Claire was on her way to deliver important documents to her husband, Senator James Randall, for a crucial meeting. Her drive had been smooth, until flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror. Claire frowned, glancing at her speedometer. "What in the world?" she muttered, pulling over to the shoulder. She hadn't been speeding or done anything to warrant being stopped. Still, she carefully brought her SUV to a halt and waited as two officers approached her car. The taller of the two, wearing mirrored sunglasses, leaned against her window with an exaggerated smirk. "Afternoon, ma'am," he drawled. Claire gave him a polite smile. "Good afternoon, officer. Is something wrong?" "Oh, there's something wrong, all right," he said, nodding toward her cap. "That thing on your head is a problem around here." She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? Are you pulling me over because of my hat?" The shorter officer snorted, crossing his arms. "Not illegal, but suspicious. MAGA types like you usually have something to hide." Claire felt her patience slipping. "I haven't done anything wrong. Unless you can explain why you stopped me, I'd like to be on my way." "Step out of the car," the tall officer ordered, his tone sharp. Claire hesitated. "Why? On what grounds?" "Because I said so," he snapped. Reluctantly, Claire unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. Before she could react, the shorter officer grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the hood of the car. "Hey!" she protested, pulling away. "That's unnecessary." "You're lucky we're being this nice," the shorter officer muttered, already moving to her car door. The tall officer began rifling through her belongings, tossing her purse and jacket onto the ground. Claire's frustration boiled over. "You can't do this," she shouted. "This is illegal. You have no probable cause." The shorter officer sneered. "Probable cause? That hat is reason enough." The tall officer moved to her trunk and spotted a locked briefcase. Well, he said, crouching down. "What's this?" "That's classified," Claire snapped. "Don't touch it." "Oh, classified? Is your husband running something shady?" the shorter officer mocked. The tall one ignored her protests and tried to force the lock open. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared from the briefcase, startling them both. "What the hell is that?" the shorter one shouted. Claire crossed her arms, her voice calm despite the chaos. "A security measure. Congratulations, you triggered it." The crowd that had gathered across the road murmured louder, phones held high to record the scene. The taller officer glared at her. "Security for what?" Claire met his gaze without flinching. "You'll find out soon enough." The alarm from the briefcase screamed through the air, catching the officers off guard. Claire stood still, arms crossed, watching their smug expressions dissolve into confusion. "What's that?" the shorter officer barked, stepping back like the case might explode. "It's a security feature," Claire replied with a hint of satisfaction. "Congratulations, you just triggered it." The taller officer scowled but tried to hide his unease. "Security for what? What's in there?" Claire met his glare. "Classified documents, and unless you want more trouble, I suggest you back away." Before the officers could respond, the sound of a high-end engine broke through the tension. A black SUV with subtle government lights pulled up behind the patrol car. The officers froze, their postures stiffening as the crowd murmured louder. The vehicle door opened and Senator James Randall stepped out, his commanding presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Dressed sharply, his face was a mixture of calm and controlled anger as he approached his wife. "Claire, are you okay?" he asked, his tone firm. "I'm fine," she replied, though frustration lingered in her voice. "But these two decided to harass me and tamper with your secure case." James turned his icy gaze to the officers. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The shorter officer stumbled over his words. "Sir, we didn't realize—" "You didn't realize what?" James interrupted, his voice sharp. That you were tampering with government property? That you stopped an innocent woman because of her politics, or that you just delayed a critical meeting with high-ranking officials? The taller officer, his bravado now gone, attempted to explain. Sir, we were just following protocol. Protocol? James snapped, his voice cutting. Is that what you call abusing your authority? You've crossed every line, and there will be consequences. Claire watched as the officers visibly shrank under her husband's glare. The crowd stood silently now, phone still recording the escalating confrontation. I'm contacting the Department of Justice, James announced, pulling out his phone. This stops here. The officers remained frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by panic. Claire finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Justice at last seemed imminent. The officers stood frozen as Senator James Randall calmly relayed details of their misconduct over the phone. The black SUV's flashing government lights reflected off their pale faces, and the crowd remained eerily quiet, every phone still recording. Claire watched her husband with a mixture of pride and relief. This was the man she knew, decisive, fearless, and unwilling to let injustice slide. Within minutes, another set of flashing lights appeared in the distance. A state patrol vehicle pulled up and two uniformed officers stepped out, looking far more professional than the pair now under scrutiny. The taller of the original officers tried to speak first. Look, we didn't know who she was, and that's the problem, James cut him off sharply. You didn't bother to know. You judged her by her hat, her politics, and nothing else. And because of that, you've embarrassed yourselves in this department. One of the state officers stepped forward. Senator Randall will take it from here. Please know this incident will be investigated thoroughly. You'd better, James replied, his tone ice cold. I expect a full report on their actions and immediate suspension. And believe me, this isn't the last you'll hear of it. The original officers said nothing, their earlier bravado completely gone. The crowd began murmuring again, their cameras still focused on every word. One voice from the crowd shouted, "Good for her. It's about time someone stood up to this kind of crap." Another added, "She didn't do anything wrong, and they knew it." James turned to Claire. "Are you all right to drive, or should we get someone to take you home?" "I'm fine," she replied, brushing off the dust from her jacket. "But I'd like to see how this plays out." The state officers began escorting the disgraced pair toward their patrol car, but the taller one paused, glancing back at Claire. "We didn't mean any harm. You just thought you could get away with it," Claire said firmly, cutting him off. "And you were wrong." As the two officers were led away, Claire and James turned to face the crowd. People cheered, some even clapping. The videos that had been streaming online were already going viral, with hashtags like #JusticeForClaire and #BiasExposed trending within minutes. Later that day, news outlets picked up the story. It sparked a nationwide conversation about bias in law enforcement and the dangers of abusing authority. James used the momentum to propose reforms, calling for better training and accountability measures across the country. As for the officers, their punishment was swift and public. Suspended without pay, they were required to attend mandatory retraining programs and were reassigned to community service roles far from the power they had abused. For Claire, the incident became a moment of triumph, a reminder that standing up for yourself, even in the face of blatant injustice, could spark meaningful change.